Good morning. We are continuing our review, a summary of the conclusion of Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're on page 1420. Aleph Tov Chof. Discussing the state of affairs before the Tzimtzum, pre-Tzimtzum. We've established that though there are no levels there, but we are getting some insight of so-called the inner workings within Hashem's consciousness, within divine consciousness, if you can even call it that, lack of a better way of putting it, where there is presence, there is an aspect of expression, because God chooses that he wants expression, but it's not an expression to anyone or to anything, because nothing was created yet. But the very concept that there should be an expression, that there should be a presence, there should be manifestation, which for us is a given, because our whole existence is based on expression. Meaning expression, I don't mean necessarily speech, just the fact that we exist and there's something to talk about. Atzmus doesn't need any of that. We say Atzmus built in Metzias Nimsa, you don't need to even say the word that he exists, because he doesn't exist like we exist. So with the fact that God chose there should be an existence, the very fact there should be existence, the way we understand existence, that itself is already a chiddush, and he called that Shmoi. Because a name, on one hand, is nothing but an expression of the person. On the other hand, the Shmoi doesn't have any substance. A name, your name, if there was no one else around you, there's no name inside your soul, embedded in your soul. It's a name that is your name, and when someone calls you by that name, they're relating to you. So no one here is, we're not yet, we don't have a state yet where anyone's calling God by name, but the very concept there should be a name, that's the Pirkei de Rabbi Elazar, actualize nivra elam hayahu shmoi belvad. So we know there was who, which is God, and shmoi. But shmoi, like he said, is only a ha'ara, which doesn't add or subtract, like when he spoke earlier about speech. When a person speaks, more speaks or doesn't speak, doesn't affect the Etzem at all. Just like the light of the sun doesn't affect the sun. And this is even so much more so when he began to discuss this topic. So Shmoi does not affect it. It's only a ha'ara, it's only a reflection. But it's a reflection of the divine. So it will express what God wants. It won't express anything else because it doesn't have anything else. He even interchanged the word shame with Oir. So Oir and shame are essentially the same thing. In Chazal, what he called in Gemara and in Medrash, it's called shame. In Zohar and Kisra Arizal, it's called Oir. He said that back on page 14:17. So now, when we talk about this name, he began to discuss all the different levels. How do we get to that name? Remember, our experience with God is we have already calling him by names. Not only that, we have specific names. And more than that, we have even Esesphiris, and we have all the way down to this existence. So he described the different levels of Osius, from speech to thought to Bina to Chachma to Keser, Rotzen, Tainug, or as it is above Keser, Arech and Atik. And now we're talking Lifnei Tzimtzum, which he called in general Kol Bat Smuse. So it's like similar to Etzem HaNefesh, where there's no actual letters, but there's the power to express yourself. In other words, we as human beings don't just have a soul, but we have a soul that's expressive, that can be expressed, that can manifest, that can reveal itself to some extent. But now, in Lifnei Tzimtzum itself, we talked about two levels. One is Ola B'Ritzeinei, where it arose in God's desire and he's envisioning existence. And then there's another level, which is the level where he is, before he does that, Kedem Alei Saratzen, where what he calls is a Gili La'atzmei. It's like only to himself. It's only his revelation, but not relating to anything else. And he said there are two levels in Shem. Shmoi HaGadol would be the general name, just the concept of a name, a unified name. And then there's Shemus Pratim, that they already become the roots of what will ultimately become the attributes called the spheres. But they're still only names. They're only descriptive. They're only, you could say them archetypes, concepts. And that's the difference in these two levels. Shmei Hagadol, I think he said, did he say explicitly that's the higher level? I think so. So he said like this. Let me just go over what we learned inside. Called Yachul. Yeah. And these specific names, you can't even call them spheres that are concealed. That's in Chetzenius Keser. That's after the Tzimtzum. What you can call them is Shemus. So it's not even spheres, it's only, again, concept, not even concealed spheres. Nesina Smokim is giving room that you should be able to call him by name, Chochem or Chazdan. And then that will ultimately evolve after the Tzimtzum into, let's see, after the Tzimtzum into concealed spheres, actual spheres, and then revealed ones. Okay. Shemus Levad, Zesa Spheres Sagnusis, and all this, he said, is Amshach and Gili Mina Atzmus, because it's all already an expression, even the higher level. The Gam Chin Hashem, even the name Shemoi Hagadol, that's a one unified name, it's called a Shem. And we explained it's not a Gili as into another, but it's like he says, Gili Er Hameir La'atzmei. And then there's the Shemes, which is within God himself, preparing and allocate, or you could say envisioning the Er Hameir L'Zulose, which has a relationship to existence. But it's all within the Er HaKol B'Atzmusei before the Tzimtzum. So I think we discussed it pretty much extensively. I think we understand that, hopefully. And we're going to continue now. But I want to make reference. I went back in volume 2 in Ayin Beis. If anybody wants to have much more explanation on this topic, I was even considering learning it together, to be honest. But we're going almost so much review. I don't want to go into another level of review. So you have on page, let me tell you where this is. Page 968.
It would be a good idea to review it.
Well, I right now I suggest everybody should review it themselves because it's a whole piece, and I'd rather it definitely helps us understand what it says here. Page 6, it's the Maimers V'Svartem Lechem Ayin Hey. Page Tov Tov Kuf Samaches, that's not 968. 968. That whole Maimer, well, at least 968 till probably 972, 4 pages, would be worthwhile reading, where he literally describes more detail what are the shemes, how the spheres are not actual substance, they don't have substance, the hidden spheres, I should say. And it's very much connected to what we're learning now, because there he literally speaks about God envisioning existence, and furthermore, envisioning even Aveda Sa'adam, the Allah Asman, which means how we're going to work. So God is like envisioning all that will be coming, and that is called names, as he says there. So they're not actual entities, they're just names like descriptions, or like I said, archetypes. If there's a consensus that everybody wants me to learn inside back on page 968, I'll do that.
I want to.
I'd like to do it as well.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
It's not a complete democracy here, but some areas we can.
Are there any no's? I doubt there's a no. George, how do you feel? Shvi?
I'm okay with it. 4 pages. I don't think it's going to take us, long to learn it.
Mrs. Schneider's clapping.
Yeah, but you have to remember that those 4 pages are pretty dense, and then that may lead us to another section in Ayin Beis. Because remember, once you get into the woods here, It's hard to get out of it.
We don't ever want to stop
but
learning.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
Just remember.
Who wants to ever get out of it?
Where
are we rushing away to? Where are we running to?
Wait.
I'm with you,
I
Tzvi.
mean,
None of
we
us
were
want to
going to do
leave.
a SIEM. Remember, we were going to finish it last year.
Let me
Remember?
suggest something.
We
How
met
about
in
this? How about
September.
everybody studies the 4 pages, and then we could just have one discussion and just call the day, rather than going into it another day.
Let's be honest. I don't know if everyone is going to have the time to do that, and probably if I teach you here, but if you all want to do that, Gesundheit, whatever you guys want.
We are not rushing. We want to understand, and this is a special opportunity.
Okay. Okay. So then this is how I would propose we go about this. We finish till the end of the paragraph on top of page 1421, because I don't want to stop here in middle, literally hanging in middle. He still has a few more things, the Rebbe Rashab, but not much more. Another half a page here. So we'll get what that Rebbe Rashab says here. And then we can go back to page, as I said, 968, and learn it there. And you'll see it's very, very similar, literally overlapping ideas. I'm even surprised. Usually the Rebbe Rashab would say Commotion is Bar Le'il. Doesn't even mention that. But maybe he does. I don't know. I didn't see it. Maybe later. I don't know. But I'll look it up. I'll look around. And there's another reason that I think it's a good idea, even though I wasn't going to read it inside, but I was going to definitely cite it, because soon we'll see how Avodas HaAdam comes into play here. Remember, all of this is in God's consciousness. So there's no Avodah yet. And yet, the whole reason God's doing this is for Avodah. Because Nesava Kosh Baruch Hu Liyislei Dira B'Tachtenim is through our Avodah. That a neshama that's rooted in these highest levels should come down below. And yes, with the help of Torah Eir and outside light and Einei Ha'eda, but at the end of the day, the neshama should activate all this. Because this is all about how God creates. It doesn't tell us what happens next. Next is the creation, and now what? The now what is that there's Avodah that starts now elevating and retracing the steps, as we put it, to connect to these highest levels. We're not being told about this just for information purposes. We're being told because we ultimately want to reconnect our existence that's after that comes as a result of the actual spheres. And we are Metzias. We're not just names. We're not just archetypes. We are a substantial existing Metzias. And I say we, I don't just mean the physical world, I mean the spiritual worlds too. They're all, once you deal with the tzimtzum, you have an existence. God, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. He created heaven and earth and everything in existence, in the spiritual and the physical. So that's this, and he's going to get back to the Avodah, and how deep does the Avodah touch? This is a big part of what he speaks about back in 968. So not only does he talk about the 10 hidden spheres, in contrast to the revealed spheres, he talks about it in the context of Avodah. So it all really does come together, and it's very much what we're learning now, almost as like a continuation of the ideas from back then. But that shouldn't be a surprise. It's one long hemshech, and everything is like interlock. It's a puzzle, and all the pieces interact and complement each other, and then you get together. All together, we get the bigger picture. So we'll proceed in that manner, even though right now, reading there, you'll definitely get explanation of what we just learned. But as I said, I'd rather finish this paragraph in Ayin Beis. We'll go back there. Obviously, this does not preclude anyone from looking yourself there. Feel free to read it. I gave you the page, 968. It's in the first edition of Ayin Beis, because the later editions, the pages are different. But just keep in mind, if you have the latest edition, they will have on the side of the page numbers of the earlier editions. So you could always find it. So I'm just pointing out it's 968 in the original edition of Ayin Beis. Okay, so with that said, let's continue where we are, and we'll get there. So we'll get there. Good. So back to here. We're on page 1420. 1420, and he's saying the following. We are on the line that begins, let's see here, Shaykhus ala Elamus. We're talking about around 2/3 or a little more than 2/3 down the page. Shaykhus ala Elamus. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow. And he's going to now introduce a third level. So we have Aleis HaRatzon before the Tzimtzum itself, which, as we discussed, all of it is called in general terms Kol Batzmusei, whereas the after the Tzimtzum would be called the outside of Atzmusei, beginning with a Kav and so on. But here everything is called. But in Kol Batzmusei, we're looking at also levels, so to speak, or you can say conceptual levels. Okay, so we establish Shmoi and Shemis. Let's hear the flow. Okay, the Gam Bechin Shema now, Bechin is Gili and he distinguishes the difference between a Gili L'Zulase and a Gili L'Atzmei, but it's not actually revealing to another because there is no other, but he's preparing himself, so to speak to another. I would say is the level that he mentioned before, the bottom of last page, from the Kutei Teira, Dibur, Beinei Lebein Atzmei. He called out the level of Aleis HaRatzon. Dibur ha'adam beinei lebein atzmei. In the Drush Tzimtzum Rishima, L'haven Inyan Mashkos Beitz Chaim, and Eiden Sur Shalamayel Ma'Aleis HaRatzon he compared to Machshava, which obviously doesn't mean actually like thought and speech on lower levels. It means within, again, the Kol Batzmusei, relatively speaking, there's two types of levels. And I think I explained that from Ayin Beis, from Samach Vov, that's the difference between Koyach HaMachshava and Machshava. It's not actual thought, because if it's actual thought, then it's all about Machshavte, and that's really the second level. So you have to say it's the power of thought, so to speak, but not the power of actually manifesting in a way that it relates to another. So he's not yet thinking of the other. And we also explained yesterday the importance of that, because there you get a picture of what is God like in his inner sanctum when he's not thinking about existence. And I wanted to just give an example for that. The difference in the 6 days of the week and Shabbos, obviously on a far lower level and from our perspective, is essentially the same thing. God created the world and he invested energy in it. Asara Mamoris Nivra Elam. Yehi Rakia. And then we say on the seventh day he rested. Like we say in Kiddush and in davening from the Psukim and Bereshis. And what does it mean he rested? We all understand it's not because God got tired. It means he's going back, so to speak, instead of manifesting and relating, let's say, like a king relating to his subjects. He's going back, so-called, to his inner sanctum, not physically back, but now Shabbos reflects more God on his own terms, like a king in his inner palace, not the king as he's relating to his people. Just to use that example. Or like we brought from the Maimer Chazal, Alav Urchen de Malka, what we say, Lishtoi b'mila de Adieta. It's not the way of the king to be involved in mundane matters. The world is mundane. It is God's creation. But if you compare existence to God himself, so in a way, when we come into Shabbos and says that we too, Zocher Yishem HaShabbos, Shomer Yishem HaShabbos, that Sheshes Yom Tasa Malachtacha, and then the seventh day we rest. What does it mean? It means as well, the 6 days of the week we're relating to God as he relates to existence. Like in a way you could say, Mamala Kalalman, in its root, all of B'Ritzeinei, as God is envisioning existence. That's before the Tzimtzum. And on Shabbos, we're relating to God as he relates to himself. Where he's not thinking, so to speak, about existence. He's thinking about the purpose of existence, maybe. But it's not about even thinking. It just means a more atzmizdik experience that you're experiencing God on God's terms instead of God on our terms. But there is an experience, so that's why he calls it Shmoi. That's why he calls it to the level of Kedem Aleis HaRatzon. But it's not something that relates yet to existence. So that's like somewhat of a taste of so-called two different divine experiences.
Like God
one is seeing the artist through the art, and one is seeing the artist on his own, even when he's not being an artist, but he's being beyond being an artist, so to speak. But remember, it's not an artist actually, because we're not even talking about creation yet. But if at Tzimtzum, we're talking the concept of creation and the concept of being beyond creation, just to keep qualify that. There's just somewhat of a little example of how to understand these two levels in lower levels, or applying it to our lives. Okay, wanted to ask something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, it's experiencing God in his being rather than God in his doing. It's a different experience.
Okay. Yep. So now we continue. Now he says, "Aval Etzem Ha'Ohr." Down below, they make a note that the seemingly missing a word. Aval Etzem Ha'Ohr, because you can't say Etzem because it's clearly Etzem Ha'Ohr. Hu Hakol Batzmusei. So here, let's not get confused. We said before, all this was Kol Batzmusei. So he's saying in Kol Batzmusei, there's the Legalis Luzulose, that he's so-called envisioning the other. There's the that Legalis La'atzmei, and now there's a third level, which in Kol Batzmusei is even a deeper element of Kol Batzmusei. That's not even a that's a Gili La'atzmei. That's what he's going to explain now. A third level, it's not even the second. The second level we've been discussing, he said, is a gili. Now, what means gili? Obviously, it doesn't mean actual revelation. It means an expression, the concept of expression. And now there's a third level. The hakol batzmusha she'ena klal b'chinas hamshach min ha'atzmus. That's not even hamshach min ha'atzmus. You can't even call it shmoi. He's going to soon discuss that in more detail. It's not even hamshach. So what is it? It's the concept of the concept of the concept, if you wish. That's why we need, again, these abstractions. There's only the only way to really fully understand it. He's going to explain more, so let's not, it's not the only thing he's saying, but he's now going to a level that's not even considered hamshachim min ha'atzmus. Ukiyadu ha'moshel, and he's going to give the example. He's going back to the example. Well, it relates to the example we used earlier, because how do we explain this in terms we could understand? So we need an example from our own lives. Where do we find it within ourselves? And this is where this is so critical, what I elaborated upon. Etzem HaNefesh, and then you have the Kochos HaNefesh, and then you have all its manifestations in thought, speech, action. The Levushei HaNefesh. So he says, as it's known, the example, the Kochos HaNefesh, and the faculties of the Nefesh, the Kochos Atzmim. So let me just, before we read on, remember, there's Kochos Gluyim, that's actual revealed faculties. I'm right now using my hands, you see my hands are moving, or if I'm writing, or I'm speaking, this is Kochos Gluyim. Kochos Nalamim is the same koyach, but it's not active. So it's like if I wasn't speaking. That doesn't mean I don't have the power to speak. I'm just not actualizing it. Or if I close my eyes, doesn't mean I don't have the power of vision. Kochos Nalamim. But they're actual kochos. It's just a koyach that is not so-called. You haven't switched it on, so to speak, but it's there. It's active. It's not active in an expressed way, but it's an active koyach. Then you have kochos. There's deeper kochos hiyulim, but then there's kochos atzmim, and kochos atzmim are haklulim be'etzem HaNefesh. That's not to say you have a power of vision in your eye, the nefesh, because remember, a body without a soul is not alive, and therefore doesn't have any faculties altogether. Not kochos gluyim, not kochos nelamim. But in the nefesh, you're not going to find faculties. If you were able to open up and dissect the soul, you're not going to find the power of vision and the power of this. In the brain, you could find so-called the nerves and so on, the neurons that connect to different faculties. But the brain is not Etzem HaNefesh. So what do we call the kochos? The same, and you have to say they're there, like we learned earlier with Isis, because where do they come from? The kochos don't come from my koyach to write doesn't come from my fingers. It comes from the nefesh, which generates these faculties. These faculties that manifest in a container, we'll call the faculties like Oir let's say ksiva, or Oir hariya. Then it manifests in a keli called my fingers, or arm, my hand, or my eye, or my ear. And then you have Oir and a keli. But where does the Oir come from? The body, indeed, is not created by the soul. But the kochos themselves come from Etzem HaNefesh. So Chassidus calls that kochos atzmim. Hainu haklulim be'etzem HaNefesh einam b'chinas hamshocha ma'hanefesh. If you were just to talk about those kochos atzmim, there's no hamshocha at all. Not even Hamshach and Nelemis, not even a concealed Hamshach. It's just the way it is in the Nefesh. Now, in practical terms, you could say, is there any a time that we see that? You don't necessarily see it, but it makes total sense. So we're not talking about when you're asleep or your eyes are closed or you're not using your faculties. That's a koyach nelam. You're talking about in the nefesh, the capacity to be able to see, to be able to talk, to be able to write, whatever the koyches may be. They're able to use your seichel. So that's called koyches atzmim in the nefesh, a klun benefesh, but it's not hamshach ma nefesh. V'chol hakol ba'etzem. Here's the rule. This is a principle. Everything that's encompassed in the core, etzem, harihu kamoya etzem. It's like the etzem. So even though the kochos, obviously, the soul is not the sum of the parts of our faculties, even the power of our faculties, but the kochos, as they are in the nefesh, they're at that point they're like the nefesh, like we spoke about the sunlight within the sun. So outside of the sunlight has its own substance, its own whatever defines sunlight, and then it extends and travels down to earth or wherever it is illuminating. But within the sun, the Alter Rebbe says, "Eina ela b'shem er v'ziv klal." So it's not the sun. You can't say that er hakol b'atzmus is atzmus, but it's nothing but atzmus. So essentially, it's like atzmus because there it's like an atzmisdika level. That's what he says here. Shakol b'etzem k'moya etzem. So this is the example in Kochos HaNefesh. Now he's going to go back to this third level of Etzem Ha'Ohr, Hakol Batzmuseh, higher than the two levels that are called Hamshacha. Now again, I have to keep qualifying because it's not actual Hamshacha. Even the two lower levels are still conceptual. So just keep that in mind. Let's not lose sight of that. Hamshacha, actual Hamshacha would be when you really have something of substance. But relatively speaking, within so-called God's, again, consciousness, or you want to call it God's field of energy that he's placed of, there is these levels. And now we have the level that is Kamoy Kenu be'etzem ha'ohr hakol u'miyuchid ba'atzmuseh is baruch. So here he's spelling out, it's not just kol, it's miyuchid. So we're talking about this Etzem Ha'Ohr, this third level, higher than Kedem Alei Saratzen, and definitely higher than Alei Saratzen, which are the next two levels. He says that which is encompassed and united with Atzmusi is Baruch Shu Kamoya Etzem. It's like
but
the
still
Etzem.
lower than the Etzem. Even this.
Let me finish, and let me finish the whole thing. I don't want to stop in the middle of a sentence. You can't even apply the word Achdus. Remember, before we said Shmoy Echad, it's one. Here he says you can't even apply the word Achdus. U'kamoy Shem Echad. Because it's so much one, you don't have to say that it's one with something. It is it. Because at the end of the day, the Eir HaKol Batzmuseh is like the Etzem. So what do you call it? He says, V'hu b'chinas Yochid. This is called the level of Yochid, which is higher than Echad. Shezeu shu Yochid be'etzem. So when you say Echad, you say one and not two. So yes, so Shmoy Echad, God has one name and not two. We're not talking about the specific names as it breaks down later. One name, oneness, one and not two, but you're negating two. Echad ve'en sheni. When you say Yochid, you're just saying singularity, complete exclusive reality. You don't even say it's not two. It's not even in that category. But it's also not built, Metzias built to Metzias Nimtza. Just keep that in mind. He doesn't say that explicitly here, but it's obvious the case because it's still not Atzmus. You're calling it Er HaKol Batzmuseh. In other words, in Atzmus, and I've discussed this previously, in Atzmus itself, and not even Er before the Tzimtzum, which is still called the Er before the Tzimtzum, in Atzmus, something has stirred, if you wish, that is going to be ultimately going to give room for Eir that's not Kol Batzmuseh for the other two levels, and then of course to the Tzimtzum, and then the Eir that comes after the Tzimtzum. So that's how high he's going now. Now this shouldn't surprise you because we have learned about this level before, and he's now going to connect it to what we've learned earlier. And I'll show you which pages he said all this. when he spoke Shmei Kodem Kekadmuse, if you recall. But let's not jump. I want to read it inside and make sure I get all the levels clearly here. I don't want to confuse myself or anyone here. So right now he says Yochid be'etzem. Now he did speak about, if you remember, Kadman. He spoke about Yochid, Echad, Kadman, 3 levels. And I think it's connected to those 3. I'll tell you where that was.
207. Sorry, 1407.
Right? Yes, Gimel Madreges Ba'er, Kol Bat Smuse, Keichil Erese, Beis Commission Bochin Sam Shachel Klolis. Yeah, it seems like it's a similar 3 levels. Maybe it's exactly the same. I have to check. I'm not positive. But that's where he spoke about Yechida and Yochid with the Neshama. So definitely connected to that. But let's continue here and we'll see where he's going with this. Okay. Let me stop a second if anybody wants to ask something. He's not finished the subject matter, so your question may be answered in the next few lines. But in case
This level of Yochid, you mentioned it in one sentence, is lower than the Etzem. Even
my
though
Kamash Malan. What's the my Kamash Malan? Of course.
No, because we're talking
Can
now
be higher
about
than the Etzem.
that this is Yochid with the Etzem.
Kochos, he gave a moshel. Why don't you just ask yourself this question? The Kochos Atzmim Haklulin Benefesh is lower than the Etzem HaNefesh or not? Of course it's lower. But the word lower is a very deceptive word because he says it's like the Etzem because in that state, it's completely, basically a part of the Etzem wanting those Kochos, so to speak. So yes, so I wouldn't use the word lower. I would use the word that it's a step after the Etzem HaNefesh, but there's Kochos HaKlulim be'etzem, and they're like the Etzem. So that's correct. Okay?
How clear? Is the? Yeah, it's clear. How is this level of Yachid different than Yecholos?
Let's see how the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain it. I'm not going to. I will stay. I maintain my position. We have to see how the Rebbe Rashab himself uses these terms. He's going to use it in the next page. So let's see how he explains it. Let's see.
Okay.
Knowing the difference between Echad and Yochid. What's the difference? They both seem to say the same thing. One, the Echad, who is Achdus HaPratim. Echad means the unification or the integration of details. Ukmai Aleph Echad, or Odom Echad. Not Aleph, Elef Echad. Yeah. I think he means Elef like 1,000. I don't think he means Aleph Echad, because what would that mean even? Oy Odom Echad. So when you say one person, not 2 people, or one person, he means the person is made up of details, but it's all as one person. I think that's what he means. Or you say 1,000. So you say 1,000, even though 1,000 is made up of 1,000 units, nevertheless, you call it 1,000. You don't call it 2. Because all those units come together in the group called 1,000. I think that's what he means. That's Echad. V'agam de b'chinas Shmei HaGadol. And though we said that Shmei HaGadol, which is the Shem Echad, had is a l'mayla madreges protis, we made it clear that one name is higher than the Shemus Pratim. It's not broken down into names yet. So what do you mean that it's connecting? What do you mean that it's a oneness of details? Gam b'bchinas nesinas mokim kanal. That even when it's giving room, Shmei HaGadol is what he said before, that it's allowing the capacity ultimately for specific names to emerge, because Shmei HaGadol means general expression, but even on that level, it still defies details. We said that clearly before. B'kol mokim harizeh b'chinas gilui. Nevertheless, being that it's called Shmoi, means there's some expression or at least the concept of expression. So there's some form of gili. Lias nimshach oir sheyeh b'chin sheirish hamoker. So it itself is not yet a root and a source for the specifics, but it's leaving room for it, and therefore it's a step away from what he's talking now about kol about smuse. Like the Kochos ha'atzmi in the nefesh have not moved anywhere closer to your faculties. It's not a koyach nelam, like I said. It's not an actual faculty that's just concealed. It's all within the Etzem Ha'Nefesh. So that's the kol be'etzem, the third highest level. Shmoi, even though it does defy details, but being that it's already manifest, he's saying we can apply the word echad there, because it will ultimately become the source of details. Or in this case, the source of the names, the specific names. So he qualifies. So even though we said clearly it's echad, but it's not yochid. Now, of course, this can definitely use some explanation, like what's the difference? So I think you can say, like he said, Adam Echad. When you say a person, every one of us, one person, so you're one unified organism, one unified whole. We're not called a sum of the parts. We're not a composite of details. And yet, a human body, let's just talk the body right now, is made up of many parts, 35, 75 trillion cells even. But nevertheless, you're still called Echad, because they're all working together. Think of an orchestra, as many musicians, clearly, but when they're playing together, it's a unified harmony. It's a harmony in diversity, in the literal sense of the word, because there is diversity. No one's going to say it's only one musician. No one's going to say it's just one. It's not one. There are many all coming together.
I was wondering if
Yochid, one second. Let me finish, and then I'll take questions. Yochid, as we're going to see, is not that at all. Yochid, like he said before, you don't even use the word echad. You're not even coming to say, no, it's all of these individuals are all working toward one end, and therefore there's that harmony that you see that they're all part of one thing. So in other words, there's that's going to be the next level, like he says. So let's just see how he explains it. Oh, actually, now there's a parenthesis. But he's going to say soon that you can't even say the word echad on the level of Etzem Ha'Ohr, because there's no connection at all to any details. All it is just the Etzem, but the Etzem has that capacity to give off Ohr, but he's not giving it off yet. So that we'll soon see what exact level that is. Whether he's going to call that Yechelis or not, we'll soon see. But I see, okay, I don't want to jump. We'll read it all inside. Okay, because of the parentheses, I'll stop here if anybody wants to ask anything.
I was going to ask, it seems like this level of Kochos Atzmim is a way to explain that this to just differentiate from the notion of Kol Yachol. If it weren't for this Kochos Atzmim, then you would be missing a step. In other words, Atzmus could do whatever it wants, whatever he wants, God. But it's a Kol Yachol, he can do anything, and there's no differentiation between what he can do, because everything is everything. There's no way to separate it in any way. So instead, there's this capacity to this, there's a capacity to that. Maybe there's infinite capacities, but they're individual capacities that are united as Yachid. So it's just an edge away from Kol Yachol, because Kol Yachol is also a capacity, but it's a capacity to do anything and everything in one blink. Versus Kochos Atzmi.
You could say that. Yes,
yeah?
You could say that.
Okay.
Every level that he introduces is ultimately trying, as I said, to explain as much as possible without resorting to Kol Yachol, so to speak. So correct. So basically, if he's going out to this third level, and I think he may even go to a fourth level. We'll soon see. I'm not sure. I have to see what he's going to say. So yes, correct what you're saying. Ube'emes, let's continue the parentheses. And in truth, b'chinas gili hazeh ein aliyas memena oir sheyeh moker. Okay, he's qualifying this further because here's the thing. You said before that this second level, koydem alei saratzen, is a gili la'atzmei. It's not a gili l'zulos. In other words, it's just for yourself, not to prepare for light for another. So if that's the case, so then it's removed from details. It's all about himself. Now you're saying, the Rebbe Rashab, I'm speaking the language of the Rebbe Rashab. Now you just added that it's Echad. That being that it's already a Gilui, it somewhat relates to the next levels. So he wants to explain this further. So he's saying that when I just said it's a Gilui, as opposed to Yochid, which will be the third level that's not, it's not in order for there to be light. That's already thinking of a light that others can see. A light that will become a source for something else. Then you have to say that this level of Shmoi, Yochid, Shmoi Echad, is at the end of the day a makir for a makir. It's the first makir. I'm saying it's a makir that will become a makir, a source for the specific names, which in turn will be a makir for the ultimately the hidden for the actual spheres, whether they're concealed in Chetzenius Keser or revealed in Atzilus. And you can't say that. So which one is it? On one hand, you're saying it's Shmoi, so there's some Hamshacha. On the other hand, you're saying it's removed from the next level, so why are you calling it Echad? So he's now going to explain a few extra lines that will understand what does he mean by Gili and Hamshacha here. So he says like this, Ki'im, what's the inyan of this level? We're talking about level 2 now. Huliyas b'chinas Gili ha'atzmus. Its whole purpose is the concept that there should be a manifestation of atzmus in some expressive way, not relating to another. Now, I already preempted, because I had learned this and I've internalized this over the years, so I already really mentioned this earlier, but let me spell it out now. Remember, we spoke about you could have an Etzem HaNefesh, or you could have an Etzem that doesn't need to be expressed altogether. The fact that there's expression, that itself is a level that God said, I want to be expressed. So it means it's Gilia Atzmus, has nothing to do with the recipient. It's like a teacher says, I have chosen to become a teacher. He's not necessarily teaching yet. He hasn't met students yet. He hasn't prepared himself to talk to them. So it's definitely not a Gili La'azulas, even in his own inner consciousness. But he's made the decision, I will become a teacher, or I will become an artist. So there's a Gili, because he wants it, but it's not one that has any connection to details, and definitely not to another. So he's saying, so it's not like like you could say that level of Ohr is the first step in order to give Ohr that will illuminate another. You first need Ohr to illuminate to yourself. That's not the pshat. It's not that at all. It's just the very fact that he wants to express himself. Has nothing to do with the other altogether. That's what he's saying. It's not like he's giving off light because he knows that the next step is to give off light in a way that relates to another. It's the very fact that he wants to be expressed and he wants to express himself. Now, why is this so vital? Because like we said yesterday, because now we have on God's terms the element of expression, because you could say the only reason the teacher wants to teach is because the students need it. I'm not talking about whether he needs it or not. The students need it. So the only way is he needs to begin to first reveal his own inner thoughts and his inner ideas, and then come the next stage where he'll start teaching them or preparing to teach them to his students. But to say the very fact that Atzmus has chosen to express himself, you could say maybe no, he's doing it all for the Dira B'Tachtenim. But the fact is here, in other words, we're getting actually a Gili of Atzmus, that Atzmus wants to reveal himself. He wants to reveal himself. It's like a Ata Haresa Ladas. You revealed yourself to be known. Now, obviously, from there will ultimately emerge the next level of Aleis HaRatzon, where he begins to envision existence and begins to formulate. So in other words, going back to my example of Shabbos and weekdays. So Chassidus explains, we learned it earlier in Ayin Beis, volume 2, the end, closer to the end, that when you say Shabbos, Menucha Shabbos, Einig Menucha on Shabbos, are we resting relative to the fact that throughout the week we were involved in the material world, and now we moved into a world of Elikus, of godliness, so relative, it's like the absence of work. So Chassidus says Friday night, that's taka the first level of Shvisa Memelacha. You're sensing, the absence of what I was doing 6 days of the week. I was immersed in the art, if you wish, in existence, in God's art, God's creation, and now I've moved into God's palace. But I still feel the work that I did, but I'm resting now. Then it says second level in Shabbos is just einig alone. It's not an einig in contrast that you're resting from the work that you were doing. So you're experiencing godliness, the second level. And then it says Raiva de Raivan, the third meal, Shabbos, that's einig be'etzem, which has nothing to do with existence altogether. You've moved to a state of transcendence that's not transcendent relative to the immanence of your immersion in existence. It's not even transcendence on its own. It's completely removed from the whole thing, the third level. So in other words, same idea here. When you're talking about godliness that relates to existence, that's the godliness that relates to existence. That's Aleis HaRatzon. The next level, Shmo Echad, is Echad. It's taken not relating to existence, but it's already Shmo. But it's God's expression of himself. You have an expression of himself. Etzem Ha'Ohr we'll get to shortly. So it's a very subtle distinction, but a very critical one, obviously, that he's making here in this parenthesis. So like we learned earlier in volume 1, we spoke about that Eir HaBligvul is just giving us a taste of Elikus. It's not Elikus as it relates to us. He wants to give us a taste of himself. Basically, you want to see a little of me? This is what I'm like, so to speak. Gilia Atzmus. U'makom mokim, nevertheless, it's still not the highest level because because once you have that, then from that we have the capacity. If possible, there'll come the next level of which will become a root and a source for obviously the attributes and the levels that come afterwards. That's what he added in the parentheses. Okay, that was a mouthful. Valkein harizeh b'chinas echad, and that's why we can refer to the level of echad, not yochid. So let me stop again. Any questions?
The Gilui, the highest level yochid. Of course, it's not a mokreo, but in fact, that's the way how Asmus is lowering himself. It's not a lowering.
We just discussed Echad, not Yochid. We're going to talk about Yochid now. We're going to go to Yochid the next few lines.
Is this what you just explained, what's just written here, explaining in part at least that when there is a Gilui of Atmos, like Asti Lavo, that we will be able to relate to that because it won't just be one, massive exposure of something that's not discernible because we've never experienced anything that is everything. But rather, when there are these Kochos Atzmi, then we can relate to God better because we can say, oh my gosh, that's infinite chesed, and oh my gosh, that's infinite gvura, v'chulu. Is that like, in other words,
I wouldn't
God
call it infinite chesed and gvura because we're not talking a level that has even the potential for faculties
differentiation?
yet.
No. So what differentiates one koach from another when you're talking about koach atzmi?
Nothing. That's what he's going to say now. That it's Yochid. Are you talking about Echad or Yochid now?
Yochid.
So let's learn. He's going to finish. He didn't finish with Yochid yet. We just,
Okay.
I stopped here after he explained what Echad was. The Gilia Atzmus, it's already a Gilui of some form, but it's still removed. So now he's going to go to Yochid.
Okay.
Aval b'chinas Etzem Ha'Ohr. I mean, I want to see how far I should go here because it's going to be not so easy. Okay.
Would the answer be yes if you were talking about Echad, or still no?
Well, Echad, I would rather answer
Okay.
that after we finish with Yochid, so then we can compare what each one so-called contributes.
Thank you.
Aval b'chinas Etzem Ha'Ohr. But the third level, Etzem Ha'Ohr, she'eina b'chinas hamshacha klal min ha'atzmus. That's not hamshacha at all. You can't even call it Shema Echad. Hagam, and here he makes it very clear. Though, here's another qualification. Shakol nimtzim imenu, even though everything is going to emerge from there. Because if there was no Eir HaKol Betzem, they would also not have Shema Echad, because where is that Shema Echad coming from? In other words, this level of Kochos Atzmim is the root of Kochos Nalamim. So everything comes from the Kochos Atzmim, but it's still not called Hamshacha. M'kol Mokum, Ma'achar she'eina b'chinas Hamshacha. Chulu. So even though, I'm not sure how you read it, yeah, okay, you have to read after the parentheses. So even though it is, everything is going to come from it, but you can't call it Hamshacha. Next page. And therefore, Eina Shayeg B'zeh B'chinas Echad. So you cannot apply to it concept of Echad, the level of Echad. Ela B'chinas Yochid. Sheyochid be'etzem u'miyuchad b'chinas atzmus ein sof. So you can't call it an echad that has some form of manifestation that relates, even though it's beyond relating, but it's still something manifest. Here, you speak about total exclusivity, where there's nothing else. It's only atzmus, yochid and miyuchad. I called it before singularity. It's not even the unification of the next level, which is also utter unity, but it's already a level that manifests. I'm going to stop here because the next section is going to be even more dense than what we've had till here. And I believe he's going to introduce a fourth level, but I think I struggled with this also the first time we learned it. Because it sounds like he's going to talk about one level higher, which is nefesh neise keches. That's even higher than keches atzmim. So yes, I'm pretty convinced this is going to be a fourth level.
So higher than Yochid.
Yeah. And still not atzmus.
And still not Atzmos.
Well, it's all, he said already, it's like the etzem, but still not pure, let's put a pure atzmus. It's going to be, he's going to call it Shmoi HaKol Batzmusei, higher than Kochos Atzmim. So that's why I want to stop here, because it deserves its own mahakofa.
Nefesh Neisei Kochos is Yochid?
No. Kochos Klulim Be'etzem, Kochos Atzmim, Klulim Be'nefesh is Yochid. We'll see. Listen, we'll learn it tomorrow. Next class. I never said this is going to be easy. I think this fourth level is going to be called Yechelis, in case you're curious, Yitzchak.
Yeah, I'm reading ahead.
Okay. Remember, when we listened to a Farbrengen from the Rebbe, a Maimer from the Rebbe, we couldn't afford to read ahead, and we couldn't afford even to think ahead. We had to learn what we heard and just continue listening and let it develop. I'm just telling you, I'm trained to learn that way. So that's why I don't jump ahead. I just read what we've had now, and let's see where he goes with it.
Yes. Us young ones are a little more impetuous.
No, it's fine.
What would
Young
you say, Rabbi, what would you say is the reason that the Rebbe Rashab is going into breaking it down into such detail about like the levels of Atmos? Like what's the bigger?
Because the biggest question remains, Atzmus at the end of the day is so antithetical, or I should say we are so antithetical to Atzmus. So Chassidus, I've pointed out many times, is like, you can see is like almost adamant in a good way to try to, as much as possible, to connect us with Atzmus. It's very easy to say, you do a mitzvah and God loves it, nachas ruach lefanai, God has nachas ruach, and that's that. You can go to sleep. But Chassidus doesn't want us that we should be servants of God and just do what he wants. He wants us to have a relationship with God. And relationships are far more complex. You know, they'll be very easy in a marriage if husband and wife just listen to each other. They don't need emotional connection, intellectual connection, conversations, but it's not a relationship. Then it would be like minerals or vegetable or plants interacting with each other, very functional, very efficient, but there's no relationship. God wanted a relationship with us. And based on that, where it says, Avahaftas Hashem, love God, know me, das elekevich, v'yadaita hayem, v'ashavesa levavecha. So relationship, Chassidus takes it all the way. So let's go as deep as we can. That's the way I would explain why it's so important. So when you really love something, you want to know everything you can about it. Obviously, we're going to come to a point where we have to say, you know, there's some things that remain a mystique, like I said, and we stand in awe of, and we can't fully wrap our head around or altogether. But as much as we could, that's what we do. And that's really the essence of Chassidus. It's trying to get as close as possible for us to relate to God. Now, that's a strong word, to relate to God. What do you mean to relate? We know He's infinitely distant from us, but yet God, in his infinite capacity and Kol Yachol, has said, I am going to give you enough stepping stones and enough signposts and enough examples of my being in your life that if you work hard, you can get as close as you can. And when Moshe Rabbeinu was on the mountain, you really see that intimacy. It says the only person who ever spoke to God like a person speaks to their friend. It's a pasuk in Chumash. And it always amazed me. The pasuk says he spoke ish el re'ehu, like a person speaking to his chaver, to his friend.
Kedaber ish el re'ehu.
Right. Yeah. And still, so Moshe is getting closer and says, so show me your face. Hareini na kvedecha. Show me your glory. Show me your, I want to see more of you. And Hashem says then, he says, you know, that what is the expression? That right. What? Yeah.
But you told us from the floor, I think, that
of course. And that's why the Rebbe teaches. I spoke about this. Where he says, what's the first expression? Right, that's the pasuk. So those psukim are really capture that both the connection and the tension, if you wish, because at the end of the day, you're talking about God here. You're not talking about two friends. You're not talking about two humans and two mortals. So it's a very profound experience, and that's a lot more than just, you know, Moshe Rabbeinu went there. He entered into the inner sanctum, went all the way. And interestingly, what got him there was the Chet HaEgel of all things, because he wanted the forgiveness. So that like compelled him to have to go deeper and dig deeper. It's like when there's a betrayal in a relationship, you have to dig deeper to find a deeper love. I mean, I'm just putting it into more practical terms. So Chassidus is a love affair with God. Let's be honest. That's what it comes down to. And that type of love, I mean, when I read this, that's how I read between the lines. It's not just some technical academic exercise of trying to figure out. Like I said, this is not a auto mechanic, auto mechanics trying to figure out what makes the car work and what doesn't work. We're not looking at the springs and the gears and the levers and so on. It's much deeper than that. This is a real relationship. And the Rebbe Rashab took it to a place that the Rabbeim before did not, at least not in a revealed way, but he quotes plenty of places. So you start going back to the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, and you see the Alter Rebbe also hinted to it. Is as the Rebbe Rashab spelled it out a lot more than anyone ever did. Like these levels, you're not going to find, you'll find them in the Tzemach Tzedek a bit, but not quite dissected as much. The Rebbe Rashab unpacks it even more than and the Tzemach Tzedek does plenty in this regard. It's a process. Look, all the Rabbeim were doing the same work. It's just a level of the question of the extent. And Ayin Beis, of course, is a magnum opus of unprecedented. You're dealing with thousands, talking about over almost 1,500 pages of material. And this is part of what we're learning now is part of the deepest elements of Chassidus. But remember, to really understand this, you have to know the Maimer Vayelech Samach Vav, and what I mentioned, what we're going to learn back in volume 2. This is by no means the only place this is discussed. There are Maimorim. Samach Ches, there's a whole Maimer Shvuos, Erzerua that talks about this. I mean, there are a lot of places that discuss it. I'm bringing it together when I teach it. I'm obviously leaning on and drawing from other places to explain it properly, but this is really heavy stuff. And I can tell you right now, I am now learning Chassidus my life, let's say 50 years. I still struggle with this because I've read it and I've learned it and I've tried to internalize it, but it still remains in many ways. Every time you have to go back and just try to understand, because you're dealing with extremely high levels that we don't, let's put it this way, we don't socialize on those levels usually, not where we hang out. So when you start hearing about it, you start saying, okay, what does this mean? Atzmus, and what do you need this level for? What do you need 4 levels altogether? You start wondering, what does each one add? And how does it play itself out in your life? We didn't even get to the applied, but we talked a little about it. We'll talk more about it. So there's a lot to say. There's a lot to say.
That's Avodah.
Exactly. That is Avodah. And again, I say this again, as much as you are brilliant academically, you really start getting this when you apply it to your life in some way. That's the time when I begin to really understand it, because then you experience it. It's not just, okay, like again, you study Lahavdil, quantum mechanics and profound sciences and physics and other stuff. It's very deep, but at the end of the day, it's mechanical. At the end of the
How would
day,
you apply Echad, what we learned today in our life?
Here, it's not about mechanics. It's ultimately about, like Moshe Rabbeinu. It's a relationship with God. It's your relationship. That's why you have to also be realistic. That's why I always say you have to talk to your mashpia to see where you stand. Because I remember someone in this class told me, they're trying to reach all these levels. I said, look, you got to be careful, because not that you can't find in some small way an application. Like you said, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha. Right there, you have 3 levels. But still, you have to also realize you're not just jumping into atzmus if you're still, like all of us are still struggling with our animal soul. And he doesn't even mention a nefesh habam is here. They're not even spheres here, let alone negative forces or challenges. So you have to also balance it all. Anyway.
The Rebbe Rashab said very harsh words about people that are learning Chassidus just for the academic purpose and not for the avodah purpose.
Absolutely. And I think it's first of all, because he couldn't stand the idea that someone just theoretically wants to understand things. And the whole point of the learning is to apply it to life. Secondly, you really can't fully understand it without avodah. I'm telling you that. I stand by that.
So what's the avodah for Echad? Like, what are we doing?
Well, I'm not ready to talk about the avodah before I finish reading what he says. I don't want to go into the avodah before we... in a few pages from now, he's going to finish the topic of b'chol meidecha, b'chol levavcha, b'chol meidecha, which is the avodah that is going to correspond to these levels. So the Rebbe Rashab is himself going to talk about the avodah, and he actually began, if you recall, the whole topic began, if you remember, I pointed that out. Lahavin zeh ba'avodah. Look on page 1408. The new paragraph there, he says, Lahavin zeh ba'avodah. The whole idea of these levels he's really talking avodah. What we're learning right now is going to lead to an avodah about all of this. Like I mentioned before, neshamas are going to use these levels to be able to do the transformation necessary in this world. I'll give you one little hint just to give you a little appetizer. I think it was Einstein that said you can't change a system from within this, you can't fix a problem from within the system where the problem was created. So the more we can go outside of the system and access it, the more we can go into the system and do what we need to do. So going to these higher levels is obviously a very direct way of doing that, because you can access things that are prior to the, like rewire from the root and not have to deal with, obviously you have to also deal with things on the ground level in the system, but when you have that access, and that's ultimately what neshamas do. Think of this world without neshamas or without Torah, how far would we get? We'd be able to get to a certain place, but definitely not to these levels.
That was a special thing of the Alter Rebbe, that he managed to take such a godly logic and put it in a human logic. We should be able to connect to that, to understand it.
Yeah, who is it, Levi Baditchever or someone else that said, when they looked at Tanya, that how did he take such a grace at Eberstein and put it in such a small book?
Yeah, Rabbi Levi talked about this well.
Yeah. And today is Yud Kislev, by the way, the Geula of the Mittler Rebbe, who was a major link from Chachma to Bina, the Alter Rebbe, Harchavas Chassidus, expanding Chassidus.
And the Tzemach Tzedek said about him, every human being that is having a cut, blood is going out. By him Chassidus would
right.
come.
If you cut his finger, yeah. If you cut him, Chassidus would come out, correct. Yeah.
He had more than one geula, right? Because after the first geula, he started saying Maimarim, but then he passed away before his geula.
Well, right. The Chag Geula was a day after his passing.
That was a year after he was
Yeah,
free.
it was a year. That's why the Geula never became a very like Yutas Kislev, because they were literally sitting Shiva. It was the day after the Mittler Rebbe's Histalkus.
On the day of his Histalkus, he was very, very weak. He fainted.
There's a whole Rishima, like Rashbi. Similar, they compared to Rashbi. He said, Kim Chamokar Chaim.
Yeah, the doctor said one to the other, you want to see him jumping up? Allow him to say Chassidus. And he said 3 times Chassidus in doing this day. And like you said just now, but in the middle of the Tzal Maimah, when it came to the word Chaim, he passed away. And who said that? The Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek. That since the
There's a Rishima, I think in Beis Rebbe, it's a very powerful Rishima about his Histalkus.
That there was no Histalkus that's passing away by the word Chaim since the Rashbi. But the Rashbi, he also passed away by the word Chaim, which means life.
Wow.
And thus we can.
There was one time that he said, one time he said a Maimer that was not for the Histalkus in one Shabbos 3 Ma'amorim. I think it was Shabbos, and every Maimer was 6 hours. And the people thought after 6 hours they will have a break, but 5 minutes later he started a second one, was also 6 Maimers. It was 3 times during this Shabbos. Even big Chassidim were not able to follow, but obviously.
Did the Tzemach Tzedek or any other Rebbe after the Mittler Rebbe reveal any insight as to why he was Mistalik exactly 1 year after his Geula from a Russian jail? Any thoughts about it?
He was 54 years old. 54.
Yeah. I have not heard. Maybe the Rebbe may have spoken about it. There is discussion that he was the only Rebbe that passed away the same day he was born, Tes Kislev. It says, the Gemara says that a tzaddik, mamalish neseim miyem liyem, that tzaddikim, like Moshe Rabbeinu,
Moshe Rabbeinu. Yeah.
Right. So the Rebbe does have a talk about that. That by all tzaddikim it's really that way, but by some it comes out the gashmias because it's like a full cycle.
What's the lashon? Oh.
That tzaddikim mamalish neseim miyem liyem, which means God fulfilled it. They pass away the same day they're born. So like the cycle finishes, the year, the annual cycle.
Yoidea Hashem Yemei Smimim. That's the pasuk.
Right.
No, there's another pasuk. Mamalish Nasem Yom Yom.
No, Mamalish Nasem is not a pasuk. The
That's from the
Chazal
Gemara.
on that pasuk.
This is Chazal on that pasuk.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So
when he came away the last time from his father's oil, the Alter Rebbe, he was very happy and he said, I got the approval from my father to stop my being a Rebbe. Nobody understood what it means. For a few years, he said he wants to go to Eretz Yisrael, he wants to stop. They asked him what should be with the Chassidim. I think he said about the Tzemach Tzedek. And then he said, I got the approval. Nobody understood what it means, but a short time after that, he passed away.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, you're still recording, although it's nice that we're bringing about the Mittler Rebbe. Everybody should bring a little.
We have here Reb Simon.
Yeah, well, we're honoring the Mittler Rebbe as well, because remember, we learned his long mimer, Mika Hashem Elokeinu HaMagbil L'Sheves.
Indeed.
That is a big basis of what we're going to soon be learning in Ayin Beis. So,
he was very strong, and he made a revolution, we could say, I think, that everything should be internal, not expressing yourself when you're davening or what, but banging and screaming. And at the same time, he was concentrating in an unbelievable way. He was standing one time 6 hours, no moving, and concentrating, and he had what to concentrate. And the Shamish wanted to show to a big hearted how he is not even knowing what's going on with him. He turned him around, and he did not know. And his streimel, his hat, was such kind of a hat that it was wet from sweating from concentration. He was a very powerful leader, and his mind, when he spoke, he has to say, Shah, should be quiet. And it was so quiet. He said it to his mind that was going so fast. He said, calm down, slower.
Mrs. Schneider wanted to contribute that, and she's mentioned that you, Rabbi Jacobson, had previously explained that there was a Cantonist decree by the Russian Tsar just several months or a few months before the Mittler Rebbe passed, which was the decree that Jewish boys, young, the bar mitzvah age, should be conscripted into the military and have to learn in Christian schools. Rahmanu Latzlam, and that.
Well, above all that, they were right. They'd go to the army for 30 years or something.
Yeah, 25 years. And that caused the Rebbe so much pain that it may have contributed to his early demise.
Yeah, the Mittler Rebbe said a mimer called Lahavin Inyan the Kiches Anshe Chayil. He has a whole mimer on this drafting of soldiers that was happening in his time. It's a very powerful.
He ended Tzemach Tzedek.
What did he say about it?
It's a whole mimer. I have to run right now. I can't talk about it right now, but it's a mimer you could probably find online a skira, a overview of it.
I'll look for it. I'm curious. So everybody listening, if I find it, I'll post it.
It's a very fascinating mimer. The Rebbe said the mimer in 1963, I think, or 61 or 63, where he talks about the Xeris and the Nisyanus in the later days before Mashiach comes. Very powerful mimer, very relevant.
There is a
The time
powerful
with-
story about the Tzemach Tzedek. Reb Simon spoke before about Avodah, that he was sitting in the Seder, in the middle of the Seder, he felt that his neshama is going out. He knew what Yochid is. So his wife was the daughter of the Mittel Rebbe. She ran upstairs quickly. He's almost passing away. So he took out a handkerchief, a red one, and he told her, put it on his face, it will be okay. And that happened. But a short time after that, the Tzemach Tzedek again passed away, because his Seder was not like our Seder. Not passed away, he fainted and everything. So his wife ran quickly to her father, again. So again, he took out the handkerchief and gave it to her. She said, no, Ta, you have to come right now. You have to come yourself. So he said, today young men, they cannot control themselves.
Yeah.
So you understand.
A little dark humor.
It's not dark. It shows what these people were. They were, these are the Rebbes. They were, I think, higher than Yochid. They were part of Atzmos. It's not dark humor.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording if you don't mind. So we're on top of page 1421.